What happened with the port of Donkey Kong around the limitations? Did they intentionally, I'll ask you point blank, did they intentionally say, Mr. Kitchen, just half-ass this and tank it? This video brought to you in part by Tommy and the Order of Cosmic Champions. This exciting and heartwarming coming-of-age Gen X novel is available now. Check the link for more info. Hey there, this is John with GenXGrownUp. You know, one of the coolest benefits of being a content creator is having the opportunity to actually speak with some of the key figures who laid the foundation of the video game industry. And my guest today is without a doubt one of those individuals. He was there in the very early days of Activision when they were forging new ground as the first third-party game developer for Atari and later others. He's the wizard behind such successful titles as Keystone Kapers, Pressure Cooker, and Coleco's Donkey Kong, and is still blazing that trail today with other Activision alums over at Audacity Games. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Garry Kitchen. Garry, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
One of the things, I periodically have an opportunity to speak with some of the gentlemen and ladies who were there at the early days of the foundation of this now multi-trillion-dollar industry. And something that I'll never experience, and something I wanted to ask you about, what's the experience of having your work from decades ago when you were a very young man still being enjoyed and celebrated today?
Yeah, it's pretty bizarre. You'll note I don't have a big social media following, but enough that once in a while I'll hear from people. And I always make a point of saying to someone who, hey, I grew up, I played Keystone Kapers, I loved your game maker, or whatever it was. I always make a point of saying, it's very kind of you to still recognize something I worked on so many years ago, because it is very strange.
I'm going to quickly take a page out of the old game show, This Is Your Life. I'm sure you've seen that old show. I'm going to go, so Garry, do you remember this old friend?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, I do.
So if you're listening, I have the Wildfire LED pinball machine, which is something that Garry had a chance to work on very early in your career, if I'm right.
Yep. Loved it. It was, it's a classic example of ignorance is bliss. I was too dumb to know that what they were asking me to do was really hard. And if I had known how hard it was, I wouldn't have been able to do it. But you're a kid, you do it.
Many people listening, the big thing they're probably tuning in to find out about is your involvement with the Coleco port of Donkey Kong, one of the greatest arcade games ever known. And there's an ongoing urban legend about its quality, and some people don't recognize the skill involved in accomplishing some of the things that you did with that. Before we talk and clear the record there, which I'm excited to clear because you were the man there, you were the man doing the work. How did you get involved with doing that port for Coleco?
Yeah, it was right place at the right time for the most part. When the machine came out, the Atari came out in the mid-late 70s. It was what you would call a closed system. You didn't go down to the library and get a manual how to program it. No one published anything. It was proprietary. It was owned by Atari, and that was that. And the people that wrote games on it were people that worked for Atari. So that changed when my friend David Crane and his compatriots decided in the late 70s to leave and form Activision. So now you had talented people with experience who were now in another company. They went through a process called reverse engineering, which is going all the way down to the chips and figuring out how it works and documenting it. And then they started doing games. So that was it. The entire collection of people in the world who did Atari games were the Atari people and Activision. So I was working on Wildfire and other electronic toys, and I started noticing that there was a lot of excitement for this other way to play games on a TV set rather than on an LED screen. I was working at this company. I didn't own the company. And I went to the bosses and I said, look, it was great. I love doing the electronic toys. I did Bank Shot too, and I was working on other ones. And I said, but you got to keep your eye out on that Atari thing going on the West Coast because it's coming like a train. They were skeptical, but I went out and I bought an Atari. I ripped it open and reverse engineered it. I figured out how it worked, went down to the chip level, dumped a bunch of cartridges with binary code in them, reverse engineered the binary code, read a lot of games, And in about 6 months, I had figured it out and documented how it worked. And then I wrote Space Jockey. And Space Jockey was my first video game. And it was really just an outgrowth of, I'm trying to figure out how the system works. I've got to be doing something. I've got to be putting things on the screen, seeing if I can move them around, see if I can make sounds. And then Space Jockey came out through US Games. And Space Jockey was the first game that came out by someone who had reverse engineered the system without any prior knowledge. So it was the first one. The only game that came out right before it, I think, was Lost Luggage. So I left. And now I'm doing Apple II games with my brother. And I get a call from someone who said, Coleco is looking for someone to program a game on the Atari 2600. And I'll be damned if I can't find anybody who's independent and available, who knows how to program the Atari 2600. Now, let me ask you, at that point in time, how many people were there? Yeah, weren't a lot.
7, maybe, on the planet?
Yeah, on the planet. And how many of them were actually not employed by Atari or Activision? It was a pretty small world.
You might have been it.
It might have been it. So, lo and behold, I made a deal with them to do it. And, it was another... ignorance is bliss. Oh, you want me to put that $3,000 machine into this $5 cartridge with 1/100th of the memory? Sure. That's why I signed up.
And then that comes to the rub. So I'll rewind me to being 11 years old or so.
Right.
And I remember ordering Donkey Kong out of the back of a magazine, mail order, waiting 4 to 6 weeks for delivery, which is almost invariably 6 to 8 weeks, and I'm dying for it.
Yep.
I knew Donkey Kong intimately like you did. Again, I love the characterizations, the cutscenes, the fact that it was like a cartoon. It told the story. There was a protagonist and an antagonist and a heroine. It wasn't just a spaceship with bullets and aliens, right? And initially, when I got my Donkey Kong, I was crestfallen because even knowing the limitations of the system on which I was purchasing it, somehow the magic of Donkey Kong I thought would just make it everything that I was dreaming. And it was not. It was fewer screens, as we know. It was fewer colors. It was fewer everything through the limitations. Now, I will say, and I mentioned in a previous video, the one that actually got us connected is that many people don't recognize the technical achievements of that Donkey Kong port. Pac-Man that Todd Fry did had flicker like bananas. You had no flicker.
Yep.
Right? You had an asymmetrical background layer with the layer, the first
Ramps.
screen that has the up and down. Yep. It is an achievement, and yet it is often looked upon as, oh, what a bad port. How bad is it? To the point that there's a conspiracy theory that, well, Coleco was making ColecoVision, therefore they must have told their developers, put a pin in that, the developer is sitting right here across from me. They must have told the developers, just do a half-assed job because we want our ColecoVision to look good.
Right.
Now, I don't necessarily believe that. It doesn't matter what I believe. We have the authority here. It seems to me they would want to make as much money as they could for as many ports as they could, for as many platforms as they could. So you were speaking with Coleco. You were working for them. What happened with the port of Donkey Kong around the limitations? Did they intentionally, I'll ask you point blank, did they intentionally say, Mr. Kitchen, just half-ass this and tank it?
Not a chance. Not a chance. There's not an ounce of truth to that rumor. I can tell you exactly what happened.
Wonderful.
I was hired. I had 90 days to do it. That was it. 90 days.
Wow.
There were 3 cartridge sizes available at that point in time for the Atari. 2K, which I had used on Space Jockey, 4K, and 8K. Yeah. There was no way that they were going to spend another, I don't know what it was, 50 cents, 75 cents on going to the bigger ROM for 2 reasons. Number one, they knew if they got it into the market in time, if it missed Christmas that year, all bets are off.
Yeah.
As long as it made Christmas and it was out in volume, they were going to sell every unit. Every unit they manufactured, they were going to sell. They knew that. The demand was so high for the product. The only way they wouldn't sell every unit is if it was just garbage. Didn't even turn on, had one screen, the graphics were terrible, all that. So long as it was a decent quality game and it made it out in time, they were going to sell every unit. And I will tell you that they did hover behind me for the last 3 days of the project when they asked me to come up to Hartford and work in their offices in a cubicle so they could see me finishing it. They wanted to make sure I was doing it, that I wasn't, sitting at home drinking a martini. Put yourself in their shoes. You have the hottest coin-op license ever. Yep. Space Invaders showed that if you do a good port, you're going to sell an enormous percentage of the machines are going to buy the game. And they know they're going to sell every one they make, as long as it's a decent game. They've already seen that it's becoming a decent game. They're not worried about that. I'm going to make the deadline. They're not worried about that. Would you spend an extra 75 cents a unit if you knew you were going to sell 3 or 4 million units and you own the company? Is it worth it for you to spend an extra 50 or 75 cents per unit?
Those all add up. Will I sell more if I spend that on it? Probably not.
I don't think so. They sold everyone they manufactured. Now, and that's a moot point. That's a moot point. Reason it's a moot point is because you couldn't do more than what I did and make Christmas. Given the time frame when they contacted me and there was a deadline, it took at least 8 to 10 weeks to burn ROMs that had my code in it and go through the manufacturing cycle. So there was no moving the holiday. I mean, you had to be in the stores by September, and I started and had to finish by May. That gave them June, July, August to test it, manufacture it, get it in the stores. They could have told me, you have 200K. We didn't change a thing. 90 days, I'm done. I have no more room to fill up the ROM. So it was never brought up in discussion. Quality was never brought up in discussion, ever, with anyone at Coleco. ROM size was only brought up to the point of I said, how much ROM do I have? 4K, done. Time, it's got to be done in 3 months. That's it. Those were the only variables that mattered. There was no, well, can I have more? I think I'm sure, I don't recall, but I'm sure I must have said at some point, boy, I could use 8K. But everyone, well, what's 8K going to buy you? Well, I need 2 or 3 more months. End of story. Let's talk about something else. I don't have 2 or 3 more months. If I have 2 or 3 more months, game comes out in January.
Even if they had given you a larger ROM,
even if
without
they
more
give me
time,
a larger
it
ROM,
would have been irrelevant. Yeah.
And the other point that's so critical is it's easy in hindsight to look back and create that crazy theory, but they didn't need any help to make the ColecoVision look better. I mean, it was the difference between a Ferrari and a bicycle. I mean,
so much more capable.
Look how good the ColecoVision looked.
Right.
They didn't need to. They knew I wasn't going to do something of the quality of the ColecoVision. It absolutely could not be done. So they weren't worried about it. All they were worried about is we are a company. We're a public company. We have shareholders. We're going to make money. And I will tell you that I read an analyst report the following year, looking back on 1982 Coleco. They put out 550 SKUs that year across their entire product line of everything. That single ROM cartridge that I did was 25% of their revenue in 1982.
Wow.
25% of the revenue came from that one cartridge, according to analysts, not me. I think they did about 4 million units before Christmas, $100 million in commercial sales. Nobody was, there was nothing but good thoughts going on here. Nobody was plotting anything. And there were no decisions to be made because there was no other path than the path we took. So put it to bed. Put that one to bed.
There's the word. Can we stop debating that finally? Look, Mr. Garry Kitchen, the man who was there, who did the work, who coded every bit.
Yep.
There was no conspiracy to tank this game. What he actually produced within the limitations was a remarkable game for the day. Do you feel like doing a what if you had had more time and 8K? Do you know what you would have changed or what might have been different? Or
I'm sure in 8K I could have done all 4 levels. I have no doubt. No doubt I could have.
Yeah.
Believe me, many times I've thought about flexing my muscles and just bringing up a assembler and starting to write 6502 and doing it just to show that it would have been possible. But
I'd love to see that.
There are a lot of reasons why I wouldn't. Nintendo is a very important client of mine. I do work for them. I would never do anything that would ruffle their feathers, much less copy one of the most popular games they ever did with an unauthorized version. But yes, if I had the extra ROM and the time, I'm sure I could have done 4 levels.
I cannot thank you enough for making the time to speak with me. It has been a total pleasure from this side of the camera. It's so nice to get a chance, as I said earlier, to sit down and talk and meet. Look, I have the games. I've memorized the games. I've played them my whole life. But learning about the man behind the games, learning the history, learning that legacy, it's that documentarian kind of thing in the back of my head that, like, I want to learn the actual facts about how it got to me.
Yep.
And you've given me that. You've given my audience that. I'm so thankful you took the time. So 2 thank yous. First, thank you again for all the work you did contributing to my childhood and some of the best parts of my life. And thank you for taking the time to sit down and talk with me here today.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Look, without you and guys like you, this legacy wouldn't last, right? People wouldn't know from Adam. I wouldn't get to sign 11 autographs when I go to Ohio. Or 15, maybe. I don't know if it's a good day.
Right.
So I am incredibly appreciative of the real enthusiasts who keep this retro industry alive by doing trading and talking and interviewing, and we owe you, not the other way around. So I appreciate you having me on. And you should get Crane on next. I'll bust his ass.
All right, hook me up.
Get him to come on.
All right. I'll do it.
Dan, you'll end up covering all of them.
I'm there.
Thank you, my friend.
All right, thank you.
Take care.